Hey everyone, welcome back to Anvil of Doom Miniatures. I hope you've all been well. Now, if there's one thing that really gets me scared when I'm miniature painting, it has to be freehanding. Trying to paint something on a surface that's smaller than your fingernail really does get my blood pressure up, and it's a little bit stressful as well. So in this little video, I thought I'd show you how I tackle freehands, and maybe we can decipher the code together on how to paint highly detailed images on little plastic men, shields, and their banners. So I'm going to paint 4 freehands for you guys today, starting at something really simple, and then we're going to progressively go harder and harder until we get to kind of a little bit more of an advanced level. But just because I say it's advanced doesn't really mean it's advanced. I definitely think you guys can do this. You can definitely tackle these sorts of illustrations. So after this video, I highly encourage you to whip out the paints and give it a go. Now, just a quick FYI, I know I'm not the best teacher around. I'm going to try my best for you guys today, but if this video is a mess, at least I'll have 4 nicely painted shields at the end, I guess. But anyway, let's start off with something fairly simple. We're going to tackle a dwarven shield. Okay, let's get this party started, and I'm using a 00 size brush for all of my freehanding, and that's just because I like to feel like I'm using a pen when I'm illustrating. It's just the closest thing I can get to it, but feel free to use whatever brush size you're comfortable with. We're going to go for a classic hammer and wings with this dwarf shield, and when I'm comfortable and ready, I start by sketching on a rough rectangle up the top left using some dried bark, and then a line running straight down the center. You can use black if you like for this. I just like the look of dried bark a bit better, as black's a little bit jarring to me. I then run a line off and up to the right, and then paint little lines where I want some feathers to be. Now, what I'm trying to do here is to kind of make a silhouette of the whole image. I'm not going to dive straight in with all the colors and shading. I just want to kind of make a background layer of what the image will sit inside of, and by drawing on simple shapes at first and then expanding them out with some paint, making sure the edges are sharp and straight and resembling the image I want, this will then make a great base for myself to work with. Think of this as we're kind of layering on a canvas from darkest colors to lightest. So I'm pretty happy with how my hammer and my wing shadowy shape is, and now I'm going to start filling it in with some color, and I'm using a mix of Stonewall Grey and some black just to draw a smaller rectangle inside my dark rectangle, and I'm making sure I don't go right to the edge, as I want the background dried bark color to kind of act as an outline. While doing any freehand work, you should definitely take your time, and you can see that I'm resting my fingers on the handle to keep them steady. This will really help if you have the shakes like me. From here, we're going to start highlighting the head of the hammer using lighter colors like pure Stonewall Grey, and I'm adding this to the top right and running it down to the left. I then do the same technique, running right to left with some Stonewall Grey and white, covering less of an area and keeping it to the top of the hammer just to emulate some light. And to finish off the head of the hammer, I do a tiny line of pure white to the outer edges, and what this does is just improves the readability a bit. It will make the hammer stand out more from a distance. I then do all the same techniques on a micro level to the end of the hammer, and I probably should have done this before, but anyway. Let's get these wings flapping, and we're going to essentially be doing the same steps as we did before with the hammer, and filling out this wing shape with a dark grey mix, and then highlighting up with lighter greys to the wingtips and the spine of the wing. Once you start freehanding, you realize that it's all very much the same steps as when you're highlighting a mini. Don't be afraid to rotate the surface you're working on to make life easier, and if you do get paint too close to the edge, do not stress, because it's super easy to clean up with some more dried bark when you're finished. If you look at the way I'm applying the paint, you'll see that I'm doing a back and forth motion with my brush, and this is to help me line up where I want the brush to hit the surface. As you all know, brush control comes with practice. There's no real easy way around it other than practice. For the handle, I use a skinny line of Lauren Forest straight down the guts of it. Then I apply some Warboss green from the top just to give it a highlight so it's not so dark. Then I dot on tiny amounts of moot green, which will make the handle look like it kind of has a wrap around it. To finish, I go back over some little lines of dried bark in between the moot green just to finish that wrapped handle look. I also go back around to clean up any edges to make them look sharper with some more dried bark. Okay, so that little doodle is now done, and let's move on to our Men of the Empire shield. And this one is a little bit more advanced because you're kind of going to need a bit of a steadier hand. Now, this skinny little eagle is a bit trickier than the dwarven hammer, and as I said, brush control and also having an eye for symmetry comes into play. There's no easy way around it. I'll keep saying this, but practice does make perfect. But to make life easier, I'm going to break this eagle down into a series of lines, and just like before, once I have a kind of skeleton of the image down, I'll start building it out and adding the meat to the bones. I'm starting with a line straight down the middle of the shield, which will eventually be the body of the eagle, and I'm doing this first because it acts as a center point and will help me get the symmetry right for the legs and the wings. I'm using the corners of the shield as places to aim for, and as the bottom of the shield is curved, it does make life a little bit more difficult. I find if I do something to one side of the body, I try and do the same to the other side straight away, as I can remember the stroke I performed much easier. Now to get my line straight, I'm simply locking my fingers and dragging the brush on an angle in the direction I want the line. If I were to simply paint the line, making my fingers do all the work, I'd probably have a really wobbly looking line. I'm also moving the shield to angles that will help me get these lines nice and straight. For things like the beak and tail feathers, I imagine I'm drawing fish hooks, and again, I'm keeping these lines really skinny so I can build off them later. Once I have the lines down, I start building off this skeleton with some more Abaddon black, going over my previous layer and building out sections and adding little lines off the body to make it look like it has some messy feathers. Now I know I could have gone hard and tried to draw this thing in one go without all these lines and without this slow meticulous method, and I'm sure there's other tutorials out there with different methods, but I like a simple approach when I'm doing freehands because I'm not a fan of cleaning up mistakes, especially when you have some blended layers underneath. To make this eagle not look two-dimensional, I'll give it some light shading to the larger, more filled out areas with some Abaddon Black and Dark Reaper. Then I'll start adding lighter colors like Thunderhawk Blue into the mix, and I'll cover less of an area, but I'll just push these to the edges. These highlights will just make it pop a little bit more and hopefully make the shield look like some light is hitting it. If you're after something quick and tabletop ready, you really don't have to do this. It's definitely just a bonus step. But then again, you could probably just go out and buy some decals and throw this whole bloody tutorial out the window. Once I'm happy, I need to give this big old bird an eye, and I'm just using some Uriel yellow as that's the color that's underneath the head where the eye is. I like to just plop this on, and I'm not too fussed if it's a bit of a blob because I'll just use some more Abaddon Black to clean it up. There you have it, one Eagle of the Empire, and I'm sure you can use this same line method to plenty of other factions freehands as well. Okay, so we've done a Dwarven shield, a Men of the Empire shield, and now it's time to get out my inner High Elf simp, and we're going to do a Lothern Seaguard shield. But before we move on to that, if you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button, it helps the channel out, and if you want to stay up to date with all my other content, hit the subscribe button. Anyway, let's get High Elf simping. Let's take those training wheels off and tackle something a little more interesting, a red sea dragon, which you typically find on a Lothern Seaguard banner or shield. Now I want this dragon to be bright and strikingly red, so I'm not going to go for a black or dried bark base this time. I'll go for a deep red, like corn red, for that undercoat silhouette. This color is dark enough to act as that outline, but against the white shield, it should pop a lot more. Now I probably should have said this before, but make sure you have a reference image handy because it will save you a lot of headaches. Sometimes what I like to do is draw a practice doodle on my wet palette first before tackling something like this, just so I can figure out what my weaknesses are. And for this type of illustration, I always have issues with the snout and the mouth of the dragons, so to combat this, I initially draw them on smaller than what they are meant to be, and then I fill them out carefully until they resemble an open mouth and a dragon's nose. Just like before, I'm not rushing this and I'm taking my time to build this drawing super slowly and carefully. I'm using the tip of my brush and dragging it back towards the center of my illustration to make those pointy fin areas sharp, and after a few minutes of playing around, the dragon will start to take shape. We're going to fill this dragon silhouette with some highlights, which will give the dragon its features. For this first layer, I'm basically going to paint the lot, but leave the eye sockets, its fin membranes, and chest corn red. Traditionally, I think a lot of us fall victim to the draw the outlines first and color it in after technique, and I'm guessing that comes down to our general education and experience with art from when we were kids. I'm sure a lot of us got a coloring in book and we were taught to paint within the lines, so when we are faced with no lines to guide us, we tend to go to a default mode of making those lines ourselves, just to make ourselves feel a bit more comfortable. On a larger surface, this might work well, but when it's something this small, it can cause some dramas. The traditional way of painting comes down to layering on a canvas, and for freehands on miniatures, I feel like this technique works much better for myself. If you really think about it, what I'm doing here is just like painting a mini, but instead of it being 3D, I'm cutting it back to 2D. I'm highlighting the key features with lighter and brighter colors to give them shape, and leaving the darker colors against the brighter colors for some contrast. It's all very relative, but sometimes it's hard to grasp because our brains process different objects differently. Anyway, that's enough art theory. Let's finish up this sea dragon, and I'm going to do some waves on the bottom, and the best way to start this is by painting a line straight across and building off of it. This line will anchor you and keep your wave straight. I'm going to mix a bit of Gorse Blaster into my RMM blue just to the top of the wave to give it a bit more of a highlight, and you're going to have to forgive me for this, but I probably should have glazed this and added some more water to the paint, but you get the point. And here it is all finished up, one Lothern Seaguard shield. If you're still here, that's great, because now we're going to move on to probably the hardest illustration or freehand of the bunch, and we're going to tackle a demon face on a Chaos Warrior shield. Let's make this guy look as mean as possible, and as I already have a black base coat down and we are making the whole shield a face, it will make life just a little bit easier. Now I've just painted over this shield that already had some paint underneath, so it is a little bumpy and lumpy, so I probably should have stripped it, but this is for teaching purposes, so let's let this one slide. We're going to use all the same techniques as before and build this face up from dark to light highlights, and I always like to start with the eyebrows just to get the symmetry right. Once I have these down, placing the nose, mouth and cheeks becomes way easier. We want this face to have plenty of expression and aggression, so by giving him thick facial muscles above the eyes and plenty of wrinkles and folds to the skin on his forehead and around the mouth should do the trick. You may feel like you're painting a ghost at times when you're doing this, but just stick with it and keep putting the highlights down. The more little details the better, and if you're feeling super adventurous, you could maybe add some piercings or even a badass scar across his eye. I'm sure once you get the hang of it, you'll be pushing boundaries and painting crazy banners and unique shields. Freehanding is definitely a skill which will help with all sorts of other things in the hobby, like if you have a flat surface and you want to add a wooden texture or some bricks or anything for that matter. Understanding that you have an ability to do more than just color the surface of something, one color, is a game changer when painting minis. Now once you do get the basics down, things should start coming naturally, and doodles like this will only take about 10 minutes or so. Now let's say you're struggling to keep an image like this clean and you're making a little bit of a mess. You can always grab your background or base color, and for me this is Abaddon Black, and just using a skinny brush you can cut into the image to clean it up a little. I'm just going to do this now after my highlights are done and before I add some details, but I'll also do this in different points in the process as well, just to keep my vision on track. Mistakes will happen from time to time, but remember, it's just paint and you can always paint over and fix something up. Now you've probably heard the line, trust the process, a million times when painting a mini, and that also applies to freehanding as well. You will sometimes look at what you're painting and think, what an absolute turd, but it's not until you hit the detail phase, which I'm heading into now, that it will really start to come together. I've added some hot reds, oranges and yellows just to the eyes to give it some intensity, and I'll give this guy some huge fangs using the tip of my brush to make them as sharp as possible. I then add some bone white to the mix, which will give them some contrast against the black, and I sketch these on as little lines just to make the teeth look gnarled and have some texture. Now I feel like my tooth work was a little bit messy here, so just like before, I'll cut into these bad boys with some black to clean them up and sharpen these big old fangs. Looking at this fella, I did think I could pump up the highlights a fraction more as well, so I went one step further and threw in some Corax white to my rust grey and just did a spot highlight to finish off. And here they are in all their glory, 4 unique freehands. I hope the graphics helped out a bit, and let me know down in the comments below what other tutorials you'd like to see from the channel. And that's pretty much it, guys. I hope this video helped you guys in some way, but my biggest bit of advice I can give to you is just to make a start on this. Just start practicing some freehands. It'll all start coming together once you're doing it. And before I go, I just want to say a massive thank you to my amazing Patreon members. You guys are a bunch of legends, and if you want to join the Anvil of Doom Patreon, head on over to the link in the bio and we'll see you in the Discord. Anyway guys, I'll see you next time. Cheers.